Hi, my name is Laura Andrews, and this is my Axial Skeleton Lab for Biology 235 at Azusa Pacific University. Starting off, we will discuss the cranial bones, and first, we have the frontal bone here that makes up our forehead. Next, we have the left and right parietal bones here and here on each side of our skull. On the posterior side of the skull, we have the occipital bone. And at the base of the skull, we have the external occipital protuberance, which is a bony point that is a link for the nuchal ligament and the trapezius muscle, and it also serves as a landmark for the 1020 system in EEG recording. Now we also have the temporal bone on the left and right sides of the skull, and within these we have the temporomandibular joint, which allows the jaw to move up and down here. We have the mastoid process, which is this bony protrusion right here. The styloid process, which is deep to that. The external acoustic meatus, which is this dark circle right here. And the squamous part of the temporal bone. Now, internally, we also have the petrous part of the temporal bone. This is the temporal bone here. And we also have the internal acoustic meatus, which cannot be seen in this particular diagram, but the internal acoustic meatus transmits cranial nerves 7 and 8. And the petrous part of the temporal bone houses the middle and inner ear cavities. Going back externally, we have the superior orbital fissure, which is that hole there and this hole there in the eye sockets. And this allows cranial nerves 2, 4, and 6 to enter the orbit. Going back internally, speaking of the sphenoid bone, we have the lesser wing here and the greater wing here. The optic canal is these two dark circles here, and this allows the optic nerve to pass through into the eyes. And then right here, we have the stella turcica, which is where the pituitary gland or the hypophysis sits. Focusing still on the internal of the skull, we have the crista galli, which is right here, and this is where the dura mater of the brain attaches and helps secure the brain to this cranial cavity. Now at the same place, we also have the cribriform plate, which allows filaments of the olfactory nerve to pass through the small receptors to the nasal cavities of the brain. Going back to the external part of the skull, let's head back together. We have the coronal suture here, which is a suture formed between the frontal and the two parietal bones. Going across the mid-sagittal plane, I have the sagittal suture, which connects the two parietal bones together. On the temporal sides of the skull, I have the lambdoid of the squamous suture, which connects the parietal bones, the occipital, as well as the temporal bones. And at the posterior part of the skull, I have the lambdoid suture, which connects the parietal bones with the occipital bone. Focusing on the bones of the face, I have the maxilla, or the upper jaw. I have the nasal bone running across here. I have the zygomatic bone, which forms your cheekbone, and this is formed by the zygomatic process and the squamous part of the temporal bone. Here you can't see, but I have the vomer, which is formed by the vomer and the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone. The ethmoid bone, remember, runs as a upside-down T. The inferior nasal concha forms the lateral parts of the nasal cavity on the right and left sides. Now, focusing specifically on the bones of the jaw, or the mandible, I have the mandibular body, which runs the length of the jawline. I have the mandibular angle, which forms this bony part right here. I have the mandibular ramus, which runs up and down. The mandibular condyle is this area right here that forms the temporomandibular joint. I have the mandibular notch, which is this slight bone depression here, as well as the coronoid process, which is this bony protrusion right here. Focusing on the vertebral column, there are 4 major curves to the vertebral column. Let's pretend this guy's spine is a little curvier than it really is. So focusing on the vertebral column, we have 2 primary and 2 secondary curves. The thoracic and the sacral are primary curves, and they are convex in nature, and the cervical and the lumbar curves are secondary, and they are concave in nature. Now, there are two special vertebrae that are different than the rest, and they are the atlas and the axis. The atlas is C1, and it articulates with the occipital condyles of the occipital bone, and they allow for the nodding of the head, like this. What is unique about the transverse processes of the cervical vertebra is that they all contain a foramen that allow for vertebral arteries to pass through the bones and into the skull. The thoracic, lumbar, and sacral vertebra do not have these foramen. Now, focusing on the thoracic vertebra, these are the spinous processes. To the lateral of each vertebra, I have transverse processes. I have intervertebral foramen. I have the body, which is this part here, and it's a little bit difficult to see in this particular area, as well as the intervertebral foramen, as I mentioned, and this is the circle that the spinal cord passes through. And I also have the positioning of intervertebral disc, and as you can see in this particular skeleton, I have these lines here, and these represent intervertebral disc that serve to cushion and support the spine, made of hyaline cartilage. Now, the cervical vertebra consists of 7 vertebrae. The thoracic vertebra is 12 vertebrae, and the sacrum is 5 fused. The lumbar is 5 vertebrae as well. The sacrum is 5 fused vertebrae, and the coccyx is 4 fused vertebrae. Now on to the sternum. The sternum is a unique bone. It has the manubrium up top, the body below, the xiphoid process at the base, and a jugular notch at the superior aspect, which is right here in between your clavicles. Now focusing on the ribs, I have 12 ribs in total. And the first 7, ribs 1 through 7, are considered true ribs or vertebral sternal ribs because they articulate directly with the sternum. Ribs 8, 9, and 10 are considered false ribs or vertebral chondral ribs because they do not articulate directly with the sternum. Instead, they articulate to rib 7 via costal cartilage and then articulate to the sternum. Ribs 11 and 12 don't articulate with the sternum at all, as you can see here, and these are called floating ribs, and instead their ligaments and tendons articulate with the muscles of the abdominal area. Now, in terms of how ribs articulate with the vertebra, the head articulates with the demifasciate, and the tubercle of the rib articulates with the costal facet,